She was 17 years old, 11 weeks pregnant, and standing on the curb outside her childhood home with a garbage bag full of clothes and $23 in crumpled bills stuffed into her jacket pocket. Her mother had thrown the bag from the front porch like she was disposing of something rotten, a quick, efficient motion, the kind you use when you don't want to touch what you're getting rid of. Cassie expected screaming. She expected tears, maybe her mother's or maybe her own. What she didn't expect was silence. What she didn't expect was the deadbolt sliding into place before she'd even reached the sidewalk. What she didn't expect was that the last words her mother would speak to her for the next 19 years would be these: "You made your choice. Now live with it." The house she grew up in sat on Maple Ridge Drive in a town called Harwell, population 4,200, sus in the kind of southern Ohio valley where everyone knew everyone and everyone talked. It was a yellow two-story with white shutters and a wraparound porch, the kind of house that looked like it belonged on a Christmas card. Cassie's mother, Donna Whitmore, had spent 22 years making sure that house looked exactly like a Christmas card. Every hedge trimmed at the same height, every flower bed weeded by Saturday noon, every window cleaned until it reflected nothing but sky. Donna was the kind of woman who ironed her pillowcases and sent handwritten thank you notes and baked casseroles for sick neighbors, even when she didn't like them, especially when she didn't like them, because appearances weren't about truth in the Whitmore household. They were about control. They were about making sure nobody in Harwell had any reason to look too closely, much to whisper, to wonder. Cassie was the youngest of 3 children and the only girl. Her brothers, Marcus and Daniel, had escaped Harwell the moment they'd graduated. Marcus to the Army, Daniel to a technical college in Pennsylvania, where he learned to repair industrial machinery. They'd both understood something Cassie hadn't figured out yet, that their mother's love was conditional, that it had terms and clauses written in invisible ink, and that violating those terms meant forfeiture, complete forfeiture. Donna didn't believe in second chances. She believed in consequences. She believed that the natural order of the universe involved people getting exactly what they deserved, and that mercy was just another word for weakness dressed up in Sunday clothes. Cassie's father had died when she was 9, a heart attack in the parking lot of the hardware store where he worked, quick and sudden, gone before the ambulance arrived. What Cassie remembered most about him was his hands, how rough they were from work, but how gentle they could be when he tucked her in at night. He used to call her Cassie Bird, and sometimes he'd whistle songs while he cooked breakfast. Old country songs, the kind that told stories about hard luck and long roads and people who kept going anyway. After he died, Donna had sealed up his memory like a room nobody was allowed to enter. His pictures came down. His clothes went to Goodwill. His name stopped appearing in conversation. It was as if Donna believed that grief was a form of weakness too. And the fastest way to stop feeling it was to pretend the thing you were grieving had never existed at all. So Cassie grew up in a house that was beautiful and orderly and completely empty of warmth. She learned to move quietly, to anticipate her mother's moods by the angle of her shoulders or the particular way she set down a coffee cup. She learned that praise was rare and criticism was constant, and that the worst thing you could do in Donna Whitmore's house was embarrass her. Embarrassment was the unforgivable sin. A B+ on a report card was embarrassing. A grass stain on church clothes was embarrassing. Laughing too loud at the grocery store was embarrassing. And pregnancy at 17, unmarried, with a boy from the wrong side of town, that wasn't just embarrassing. That was catastrophic. That was the kind of thing that required amputation. His name was Tyler Reese, and he worked at the gas station out on Route 9, the one with the faded Sinclair dinosaur sign and the cooler that never got quite cold enough. He was 19, already a year out of high school, and he had dark hair that fell across his forehead and a crooked smile that made Cassie feel like she was the only person in any room. They'd met the summer before her senior year, when she'd walked 3 miles in the August heat just to buy a Coke she didn't really want. He'd been wiping down the pumps, and he'd looked up at her with those eyes, brown and deep and curious, and said, "Hot enough for you?" And that was it. That was everything. Within 2 weeks, they were meeting in secret, in the back of his rusted-out Chevy, parked behind the abandoned textile mill, watching the woods by the creek where nobody went anymore, in the narrow spaces between what Donna allowed and what Cassie wanted. She knew it was stupid. She knew Tyler wasn't going anywhere. He'd told her as much, told her his plan was to save up enough to lease a bigger garage, maybe open his own mechanic shop someday, maybe stay in Harwell his whole life. And Cassie's plan had been different. Cassie's plan had been college, a nursing degree, a small apartment in a city where nobody knew her mother's name. But plans have a way of collapsing when your body decides to do something without your permission. And on a cold morning in October, crouched on the floor of the bathroom she'd used her whole life, staring at two pink lines on a plastic stick, Cassie felt every future she'd imagined fold in on itself like a house of cards hit by a gust of wind. She didn't tell Tyler first. That was her first mistake. She told her mother. She'd thought, and this was the kind of naive hope that only 17-year-olds are capable of, that maybe the news would soften Donna, that maybe some dormant maternal instinct would rise up and override all the years of rigidity and control, that maybe her mother would sit her down at the kitchen table and say, "We'll figure this out together." Instead, Donna had gone very still. Her face had done something Cassie had never seen before. It had emptied. Every trace of expression had drained out of it like water from a sink. And then Donna had asked one question: who? And when Cassie had said Tyler's name, something in her mother's eyes had turned to stone. "Sam, the gas station boy," Donna had said, "the one with the drunk father and the sister who works at that bar. You let that boy touch you. You let him put his hands on you, and now you're standing in my kitchen telling me you're carrying his child. And what am I supposed to do, Cassandra? What exactly am I supposed to tell people?" Cassie had started to answer. She'd started to say that she didn't care what people thought, that she loved Tyler, that they could make this work. But Donna had held up one hand, a single sharp gesture, and Cassie had stopped. Her mother had walked to the hall closet, pulled out a black garbage bag and handed it to her. "You have 1 hour to pack what you can carry. After that, the locks change." 63 minutes later, Cassie was standing on the curb, and the yellow house with the white shutters looked like it belonged to someone else's life. She walked for 2 hours that first night. She didn't have a destination. She just walked, the garbage bag bouncing against her leg with every step, the November air cutting through her jacket like it was made of paper. Tyler's shift at the gas station didn't end until 11, and she didn't have the energy to explain what had happened, to see the fear in his face when she told him, to watch him do the math and realize that his future had just gotten a lot smaller too. So she walked past the station, past the diner, past the church where her mother taught Sunday school, past the hardware store where her father had died. She walked until the sidewalks ended and the road turned to gravel and the streetlights stopped and there was nothing but darkness and fields and the sound of her own breathing. The junkyard appeared out of nowhere. One moment, there was nothing but black trees against a blacker sky, and the next there was a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and beyond it, a landscape of broken things. Cars stacked 3 high, their windows shattered, their bodies rusted into shades of orange and brown. Washing machines and refrigerators piled like dead elephants. A school bus with no wheels, tilted at an angle that made it look like it was sinking into the earth. And in the center of it all, a single light, a bare bulb hanging from a wire above what looked like a shed made of corrugated metal and hope. Cassie didn't plan to climb the fence. She didn't plan anything. Her body just moved, her fingers finding holds in the chain link, her jacket catching on the barbed wire and tearing as she hauled herself over. She landed hard on the other side, her ankle twisting on something she couldn't see, and for a moment, she just lay there in the dirt, staring up at the sky, wondering if this was how the rest of her life was going to feel. Like falling, like landing wrong, like lying in the dark, surrounded by things that had been thrown away. She found the bus. The door was missing, and the seats had been stripped out, but someone had left a tarp inside, folded in the corner like they'd meant to come back for it. She spread it on the floor and lay down with her garbage bag as a pillow and her jacket pulled up to her chin. And she didn't sleep. Not really, but she closed her eyes and listened to the wind moving through the wreckage and tried not to think about the thing growing inside her, the thing that didn't know yet that it had already been abandoned by its grandmother, that its first home was a rusted school bus in a junkyard on the edge of a town that didn't want it. She woke to the sound of footsteps. It was morning, early, the light gray and thin, the air cold enough that her breath made clouds. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, the crunch of boots on gravel, and they were getting closer. Cassie pressed herself against the wall of the bus, her heart hammering, every muscle in her body coiled to run. But there was nowhere to run to, And anyway, she was too tired, too cold, too empty. The face that appeared in the doorway belonged to an old man. 70, maybe older. He had skin the color of weathered oak, and eyes that were gray like the morning sky, and hands that were so covered in grease and scars that they looked like they'd been carved from engine parts. He was wearing coveralls that might have been blue once, a flannel shirt underneath, and a cap with a faded logo that Cassie couldn't read. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her, at the garbage bag, at the torn jacket, at the way she was pressed against the wall like a cornered animal, and then he did something she wasn't expecting. He sighed. Not an angry sigh, not a frustrated sigh, a tired sigh. The kind of sigh you make when you've seen something sad so many times that it doesn't surprise you anymore, only weighs you down. "You gonna tell me what you're doing in my bus," he said. And Cassie, Sue, who hadn't cried when her mother threw the bag, who hadn't cried while she walked for 2 hours in the cold, who hadn't cried when she climbed the fence and twisted her ankle, Cassie started to cry. The man's name was Earl Tatum. He'd owned the junkyard for 41 years, ever since his own father had died, and left him nothing but a fenced-in acre of other people's garbage and a rusted Airstream trailer with no working plumbing. He'd been married once, a long time ago, to a woman named Bet, who died of ovarian cancer before they'd been able to have children. He'd been alone ever since, alone with the wrecks and the rust and the occasional stray dog that wandered in looking for shelter. He was used to strays. He understood them. He didn't ask many questions that first morning. He led Cassie out of the bus and across the junkyard to the Airstream, which did have working plumbing now. He'd fixed it himself 30 years ago, and he made her sit at a small folding table while he heated water on a propane stove. He made instant coffee, the cheap kind that comes in a jar, and he set a cup in front of her along with a sleeve of saltine crackers, and he sat across from her and waited. He didn't push. He didn't pry. He just waited, his gnarled hands wrapped around his own cup, his gray eyes watching her with something that wasn't pity exactly. Something more like recognition. She told him everything, not because she trusted him. She didn't know him. She had no reason to trust him, but because the words wouldn't stay inside anymore. They poured out of her like water from a broken pipe. Her mother, the pregnancy, Tyler, the garbage bag, the deadbolt, the walk, the fence, the bus. She told him about the yellow house and the white shutters and the way her father used to whistle in the kitchen. She told him about the 2 pink lines and the way Donna's face had emptied. She told him about the hour she'd been given to pack her life into a plastic bag and the 63 minutes she'd actually taken and the way the lock had slid into place before she'd reached the sidewalk. And when she was done, when there was nothing left to say, she looked at this old man she'd never met and asked him the only question that mattered. What do I do now? Earl was quiet for a long time. He finished his coffee, set the cup down, and looked at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see everything. The way I figure it, he said, you got 2 choices. Oh, you can go back to that gas station boy and hope he's got a plan, or you can stay here. I got a spare room in the back, if you can call it that. More like a closet with a cot. But it's warm, and it's dry, and I could use the help around here. Place is getting too big for one old man. Cassie stared at him. You don't know me. Earl shrugged. I know enough. I know you climbed my fence instead of sleeping under a bridge. I know you're pregnant and alone and your mama threw you out like trash. I know you're scared, and I know that's about the worst combination of things a person can be at 17 years old. His voice softened. I'm not offering you charity, girl. I'm offering you work. You help me around the yard, sort parts, answer the phone when it rings, keep the books if you can do numbers. I'll pay you what I can, which ain't much, but it's something, and you'll have a roof over your head while you figure out the rest. She didn't understand. She kept waiting for the catch, for the other shoe to drop, for this stranger to reveal some hidden motive that would make his kindness make sense. But Earl just sat there, patient, watching her the way you watch a wild animal, deciding whether or not to come closer. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? And Earl looked at her for a long moment before he answered. Because somebody did it for me once, a long time ago, when I was in a bad way and didn't have nobody. A man I'd never met gave me work and a place to sleep and didn't ask for nothing but effort. He's been dead 50 years now, and I still think about him every day. This is how you pay a thing like that back. You don't. You pay it forward. She stayed. Not because she had anywhere else to go, she didn't, but because something in Earl's voice had sounded like her father. Like the way her father used to whistle those old country songs about hard luck and long roads and people who kept going anyway. The first weeks were the hardest. The cot in the back room was narrow and lumpy, and the airstream creaked in the wind like it was about to come apart at the seams. The work was physical, sorting through car parts, cataloging inventory, hauling scrap metal to the processing shed, and Cassie's body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But the worst part wasn't the work. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting for her mother to change her mind. Waiting for a phone call that never came. Waiting to feel something other than the cold, hollow absence of everything she'd lost. Tyler came looking for her on the third day. Earl had told him where she was. She'd asked him to, and Tyler had driven out to the junkyard in his rusted Chevy, with his face pale and his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He'd stood in front of her in the gray afternoon light and told her he loved her, and told her they could make this work, and told her he'd been saving money for his garage, and now he could use it for an apartment instead, for them, for the baby. She'd wanted to believe him. She'd wanted to climb into that Chevy and drive away from the junkyard and start the life they'd whispered about in the back seat when they thought nobody could hear. But something had changed inside her. Something that had frozen on the night she'd slept in the bus. And she looked at Tyler, and she saw a 19-year-old boy who still lived with his mother and worked at a gas station and had never been more than 50 miles from Harwell. She saw someone who loved her, yes. But she also saw someone who would drag her back into a life she'd never chosen. A life that smelled like gasoline and looked like Route 9 forever. "I need to do this alone," she told him. And she watched something break behind his eyes, something that would never fully heal. He came back twice more over the following weeks. Each time she told him the same thing. Each time he left a little more wounded. And then he stopped coming. She heard through Earl, who heard through his suppliers, that Tyler had taken a job in Kentucky, something to do with an uncle who owned a trucking company. He was gone by Christmas. She never heard from him again. The baby was born on a Tuesday in April at 3:17 in the morning in the back of Earl's pickup truck because Cassie had waited too long to tell him she was in labor and the hospital was 22 miles away and there wasn't time. Earl had pulled over on the side of the road and climbed into the bed of the truck and delivered that baby himself, his grease-stained hands suddenly steady and sure, his voice calm in the darkness. "I got you," he kept saying. "I got you." And when the baby emerged, a girl, red-faced and screaming, already furious at the world, Earl had wrapped her in his flannel shirt and handed her to Cassie with tears streaming down his weathered face. She named her Rose because there was a rose bush growing wild by the junkyard fence, tangled and thorny and half dead when Cassie had first arrived, but blooming now, ye fat pink blossoms pushing through the barbed wire like they didn't know they weren't supposed to be there. The years passed the way years do when you're too busy surviving to notice them. Cassie learned the junkyard. She learned which parts were valuable and which were scrap. She learned how to talk to the mechanics who came looking for alternators and transmissions and door panels from cars that hadn't been made in 30 years. She learned how to keep the books. Earl's filing system had been a shoebox full of receipts, and she turned that shoebox into a ledger, then into a spreadsheet on a secondhand computer she bought for $75 from a man whose wife had died. She learned how to run a business, and somewhere along the way, she started running this one. Earl's health began to fail when Rose was 4. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then the shortness of breath, then a diagnosis that neither of them wanted to hear. Emphysema, years of breathing in rust and exhaust and metal dust catching up with him all at once. The doctors gave him 5 years. He lasted 7. "Stubborn old man," Cassie said at his funeral, her voice cracking. She meant it as the highest compliment. He left her everything. The junkyard, the airstream, the 17 acres it all sat on, the inventory that was worth more than anyone who looked at it would ever guess. His lawyer, a tired man in a cheap suit who'd handled Earl's affairs for 30 years, handed her a letter along with the deed. Earl had written it 3 years before he died, when he'd first gotten sick, and he'd told the lawyer to give it to her only after he was gone. The letter said, "You saved me as much as I saved you. Doc, don't ever forget that the people who throw you away don't get to decide what you're worth. The people who pick you up do. Take care of that girl. Take care of that yard. And if you ever find yourself with more than you need, remember what I told you. You don't pay it back. You pay it forward." Cassie read that letter so many times the paper started to wear thin at the creases. She kept it in a metal lockbox under the floor of the Airstream, along with the only photograph she had of her father, the one she grabbed during that 63 minutes, the one her mother hadn't gotten around to throwing away yet. Rose grew up in the junkyard the way some children grow up on farms, with grease under her fingernails and calluses on her palms and a vocabulary that included words like carburetor and differential and manifold before she knew the names of all the state capitals. She was a strange child, quiet and watchful, with her mother's dark hair and her grandfather Tyler's crooked smile, though she didn't know that, didn't know anything about Tyler except that he'd left before she was born and that some people just weren't built to stay. She asked about her grandmother only once, when she was 6, after a girl at school had talked about visiting her grandma's house for Thanksgiving. Cassie had frozen. Man, she'd stood there with a wrench in her hand and dirt on her face, and no idea how to explain to a 6-year-old that some grandmothers loved you and some grandmothers threw you away like garbage. Your grandma lives far away, she'd finally said, and she's not a very nice person, and that had been the end of it for a while. The junkyard grew. Cassie expanded the inventory, built a website, started selling parts online to customers as far away as Alaska and Maine. She hired 2 employees, a quiet man named Marcus, who'd done time for armed robbery and couldn't find work anywhere else, and a young woman named Destiny, who'd aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a trash bag of clothes and a look in her eyes that Cassie recognized. She paid them fairly, gave them hours they could work around, didn't ask questions about their pasts. When she remembered what Earl had taught her, that broken things had value, that discarded things could be rebuilt, that the world was full of people who just needed someone to look past the rust. She never contacted her mother, not once, in all those years. Not when Rose started kindergarten, not when Rose graduated 8th grade at the top of her class, not when Cassie bought the adjacent 10 acres and doubled the size of the operation, not when the local newspaper did a profile on her. Single mother builds salvage empire from nothing, the headline said, which was too dramatic but not entirely wrong. She thought about Donna sometimes, late at night when Rose was asleep and the junkyard was quiet and the only sound was the wind moving through the wrecks. She wondered if her mother had read that newspaper article. When she wondered if her mother knew that the daughter she'd thrown out was successful, was strong, was raising a child who was kind and curious and loved. She wondered if her mother felt anything at all, regret, shame, the smallest flicker of doubt about what she'd done. But she never called, and Donna never called either. Rose was 15 when she found the letter. It wasn't Cassie's fault. She'd been careful, always careful, kept the lockbox hidden, kept the past sealed away where it couldn't contaminate the present. But Rose was 15, and 15-year-olds are curious. And one afternoon when Cassie was negotiating with a supplier 40 miles away, Rose decided to look for Christmas presents in places she wasn't supposed to look. She found the lockbox. She found the letter from Earl. And she found the photograph of a man who looked like the grandfather she'd never met. When Cassie came home that night, Rose was sitting at the kitchen table with the photograph in front of her and a look on her face that Cassie had never seen before. Somewhere between hurt and fury and something deeper, something that looked like betrayal. "Who is this?" Rose asked. "My father," Cassie said. "Your grandfather. He died when I was young." "And why don't I know about him? Why don't I know about any of them? Why have you never told me anything about where you came from?" Cassie sat down across from her daughter. The photograph lay between them like an accusation. The letter was there too, Earl's careful handwriting visible through the worn paper. She could see the words, "people who throw you away," and she wondered how much Rose had read, plus how much she understood, how much damage Cassie had accidentally done by trying to protect her. "Because it hurts," Cassie said. "Because the people I came from, my mother, she wasn't kind to me, Rose. She threw me out when I was pregnant with you. She said things I've never been able to forget, and I didn't want that poison anywhere near you. I didn't want you to grow up knowing that your grandmother thought you were trash before you were even born." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "But I had a right to know. I had a right to know who I am, where I came from. You don't get to just erase a whole part of my history because it's painful for you." And Cassie wanted to argue. She wanted to say that Rose didn't understand, that she was too young, that some truths were too heavy for 15-year-old shoulders. But she looked at her daughter, this fierce, an intelligent girl who'd grown up among broken things and learned to see the value in them. And she realized that Rose was right. That silence wasn't protection. That hiding the past didn't make it disappear. That somewhere, 90 miles away, there was a woman who shared their blood, and pretending she didn't exist was just another kind of lie. "What do you want to know?" Cassie asked. And Rose said, "Everything." So Cassie told her, all of it. The yellow house and the white shutters. Donna's obsession with appearances. The way Cassie's father used to whistle in the kitchen. The pregnancy test. The garbage bag. The 63 minutes. The walk in the cold. The junkyard and Earl in the cot in the back room, and the night Rose was born in the bed of a pickup truck on the side of the road. She told her about Tyler, too. His crooked smile, his rusted Chevy, even the way he'd looked when she told him she needed to do this alone. She didn't make him a villain. He wasn't a villain. He was just a 19-year-old boy who wasn't ready, who couldn't stay, who became a ghost before Rose ever knew him. When she was done, Rose sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "I want to meet her." Cassie's heart stopped. "Who?" "My grandmother. I want to meet her." "Rose, you don't understand. I understand that she threw you out, and that was wrong. But I also understand that you've spent 15 years hating someone I've never even seen. And maybe she's terrible. Maybe she's exactly as bad as you say. But maybe she's not. Maybe she's changed. Maybe she's spent all this time regretting what she did, and she doesn't know how to reach out. I won't know unless I meet her. And I want to know. I need to know." So Cassie couldn't argue with that logic. She wanted to, God, she wanted to, but she couldn't. Because underneath all the anger, underneath all the scar tissue that had formed over the wound her mother had made, there was still a small, stubborn part of her that wondered the same thing. That wondered if Donna had changed. That wondered if 19 years was long enough for even the hardest heart to soften. "Okay," she said, "we'll go." They drove to Harwell on a Sunday in October, almost exactly 19 years after the night Cassie had left. The town looked different and the same. The diner had a new sign. The church had a new coat of paint. The gas station on Route 9 was still there, but the faded Sinclair dinosaur was gone, replaced by something corporate and soulless. Shan Maple Ridge Drive. Maple Ridge Drive looked like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. The colors had faded, the edges had worn. The yellow house was not yellow anymore. The paint had peeled away in patches, revealing gray wood underneath, and the white shutters were hanging at angles that suggested no one had touched them in years. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle. The flower beds that Donna had tended so obsessively were overgrown with weeds, a few dead stalks poking up through the tangle like bones. The hedge that had been trimmed to exactly the same height was a shapeless mass now, blocking half the front windows. Cassie sat in the car for a long time, staring at the ruin of her childhood home. This wasn't what she expected. She'd expected the house to look the same, pristine and perfect and hostile. A shrine to Donna's relentless standards. Instead, it looked abandoned. It looked like something had broken. "Mom," Rose said, "are you okay?" Cassie wasn't okay, but she got out of the car anyway. The front walk was cracked, weeds pushing up through the concrete. The steps creaked under her weight in a way they never had before. She knocked on the door, the same door that had slammed shut behind her 19 years ago, and waited. The woman who opened it was not the mother Cassie remembered. Donna Whitmore had been tall once, proud, with steel gray hair she kept perfectly styled, and a posture so rigid you could have used her spine as a level. The woman in the doorway was stooped, thin. Her hair had gone completely white and hung in lank strands around a face that looked like it had caved in on itself. And she was wearing a housecoat that might have been floral once but had faded to an indeterminate gray, and her feet were bare, the toenails yellow and overgrown. She looked at Cassie with eyes that took a long moment to focus, and when they did, something moved behind them, something Cassie had never seen in her mother's face before. Fear. Cassandra? Donna's voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a woman who hadn't spoken to another person in a long time. "Is that Cassandra?" "Yes, Mama, it's me." Donna's gaze shifted to Rose, standing a few steps behind, and her whole body seemed to shrink. The baby?" "She's 15 now," Cassie said. "Her name is Rose." And Donna did something Cassie had never seen her do, not once in 17 years of living under her roof, not once in the 19 years since she'd left. Donna started to cry, not a dignified cry, not a controlled cry, an ugly, gasping, broken cry, the sound of something that had been held together too tightly for too long, finally coming apart. Inside, the house was worse than the outside. The Christmas card perfection that Donna had maintained for 22 years was gone. Dishes were piled in the sink, crusted with food that might have been days old or might have been weeks. Stacks of newspapers covered every surface, not organized stacks, but tottering piles that looked like they'd been thrown there and forgotten. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the light, and the air smelled stale, like a room where the windows hadn't been opened in a long time. Cassie saw a photograph on the mantel, one she recognized. It was her father, the same picture she had in her lockbox, the only copy she thought existed. And next to it, a photograph she didn't recognize, a photograph of a teenage girl with dark hair and a hesitant smile, a photograph of herself. Donna saw her looking. "I never threw it away," she said. "I couldn't. I tried. After you left, I tried to get rid of everything, same as I did with your father, but I couldn't. I kept that one. I looked at it every day." Cassie didn't know what to say. She'd spent 19 years constructing a version of her mother in her head, a cold, rigid woman who'd made a decision and never looked back, who'd felt nothing, who'd moved on with her life as if her youngest daughter had never existed. But the woman sitting in front of her now, in this decaying house, was not that woman. This woman was broken. This woman was alone. This woman had been slowly falling apart for almost 2 decades, and nobody had noticed because nobody was left to notice. "What happened to you?" Cassie asked. Donna was quiet for a long time. Rose sat on the edge of a chair, watching, and Cassie stood in the middle of the room, and the silence stretched until it seemed like it would swallow everything. "Your brothers stopped calling," Donna finally said, "after you left. Marcus, he said I'd gone too far this time. He said he didn't want to talk to me until I made things right with you, but I didn't know where you were. I didn't know how to find you, and I was too proud to look, too proud to admit I'd been wrong. And then the years started passing, and it got easier not to think about it, easier to tell myself I'd done the right thing, easier to pretend." She looked down at her hands, and Cassie saw that they were trembling. And then the church stopped inviting me to things. The neighbors stopped waving. People started looking at me differently. Word got around, it always does in a town like this, and I became the woman who threw out her pregnant daughter, the woman without a heart. I didn't have any friends left. I didn't have any family left. I just had this house, and I couldn't even keep that up anymore. I couldn't do anything. Her voice broke. "I thought about you every day, every single day. I wondered where you were, if you were safe, if the baby had been born healthy. I looked at that photograph and I hated myself for what I'd done, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if you'd even want me to try. And then so much time had passed that it felt impossible. Impossible to call, impossible to show up. And impossible to say I'm sorry when sorry couldn't even begin to cover it." Cassie felt something cracking open inside her. Something old and hard and brittle, something she'd carried for 19 years without realizing how heavy it was. She looked at her mother, this frail, broken woman who had caused so much pain, and she saw someone who had been punished by her own choices more thoroughly than any revenge could have accomplished. Donna had wanted appearances more than anything, and now she had lost everything: her reputation, her family, her mind slowly unraveling in this decaying house, because she'd sacrificed the one thing that mattered for the one thing that didn't. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. "Why?" Cassie asked. "That's what I've never understood. Why did you do it? Why did you throw me out?" Donna's face crumpled. "Because I was afraid. Because I'd spent my whole life being afraid of what people would think, and I was so terrified of being embarrassed that I couldn't see anything else. I couldn't see that you needed me. I couldn't see that protecting you was more important than protecting my reputation. I couldn't see anything except my own fear. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. You were gone, and I didn't know how to get you back." Rose moved then. She crossed the room, stepping over the piles of newspapers, navigating the chaos of a life that had fallen apart, and she knelt down in front of Donna. She took her grandmother's trembling hands in her own young, strong ones. Donna, and she looked up at her with Tyler's crooked smile and Cassie's dark hair and something that belonged only to herself. "I'm Rose," she said. "I've wanted to meet you my whole life." And Donna, who had thrown away her daughter, who had lost everything, who had spent 19 years rotting alone in a house that was falling down around her, looked at this girl, this granddaughter she'd never known, and she said, "You're beautiful. You're so beautiful, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I missed it. I'm so sorry I missed all of it." They didn't stay long that first visit. There was too much damage, too much history, too many years of pain that couldn't be resolved in an afternoon. But they came back, a week later, then again, then again. Rose insisted, and Cassie couldn't say no, not to Rose, who saw something in Donna that Cassie couldn't see yet. Something worth salvaging. They started cleaning, Rose and Cassie together with gloves and garbage bags, and a determination that felt familiar to Cassie, that felt like another version of the work she'd done all those years ago in Earl's junkyard. They threw out the newspapers, scrubbed the dishes, opened the windows for the first time in what might have been years. They hired a contractor to fix the porch, a landscaper to clear the flower beds, a painter to restore the yellow paint that Donna had let fade. It cost money. Money Cassie had, thanks to Earl, thanks to the junkyard, thanks to 19 years of building something from the wreckage her mother had made of her life. Donna watched them work. She was too frail to help, too tired, her body worn out by years of neglect and isolation. But she watched. And sometimes, when she thought nobody was looking, she smiled. 6 months after that first visit, Cassie moved Donna into a room in the Airstream. The yellow house was sold. There was no point keeping it. Too many bad memories, too much decay, and the money went into an account for Rose's college fund. Donna didn't argue. She didn't have the strength to argue anymore, and anyway, she seemed to understand that she'd lost the right to make decisions about her own life a long time ago. Living with Donna was hard. There were days when Cassie couldn't look at her without feeling the old anger rise up, the memory of that garbage bag, that deadbolt, those final words. There were days when they fought, when old wounds were ripped open and salt was poured in, and both of them said things they regretted. But there were other days too. Days when Donna told stories about Cassie's father, stories Cassie had never heard, memories that had been locked away for 30 years, and Cassie realized that her mother had loved him desperately, had never recovered from losing him. Days when Donna watched Rose doing homework, and her face softened into something that looked almost like pride. Days when the three of them sat on the porch of the Airstream and watched the sun set over the junkyard. The strange landscape of broken things that had become a home, and nobody spoke because there was nothing to say that the silence didn't already hold. Donna lived for 3 more years. The last 6 months were hard. Cassie hired a nurse to help with the day-to-day, but she was there for the important moments. Which are the conversations that happened at 2 a.m. when Donna couldn't sleep, the slow letting go that happens when a body decides it's time to stop fighting. On the last night, Donna held Cassie's hand and said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I never did. But thank you for giving me this time anyway. Thank you for letting me see who you became. Thank you for letting me know, Rose." Cassie didn't say I forgive you. She wasn't sure if she ever would, but she said, "I'm glad you got to know her too." And that was enough. Donna died at 4:43 in the morning, in the back room of the Airstream that had once been Cassie's first home in the junkyard, the room where Earl had offered her a cot and a job and a second chance at a life. She was buried next to Cassie's father, in a cemetery outside Harwell, and her gravestone said only, "Donna Whitmore, da mother, grandmother, finally at peace." Rose graduated high school at the top of her class. She went to college on a full scholarship, engineering, because she'd grown up around machines and learned to love the logic of them. And then she came back to Harwell. Not to the town, which had nothing for her, but to the junkyard. To the business her mother had built. To the legacy that had started with a pregnant teenager climbing a fence in the dark and an old man who believed that broken things could be repaired. Cassie is 52 now. Her hair has started to gray at the temples, and her hands look more like Earl's every year, scarred and calloused and stained with grease that never quite washes out. The junkyard has grown into something that would have amazed the girl who slept in that school bus 35 years ago, 47 acres now. Yields a warehouse for online sales, 12 employees, a reputation that stretches across 3 states. She still works every day, still answers the phone when it rings, still gets her hands dirty pulling parts from wrecks that other people have given up on. And sometimes, late at night, when Rose is asleep and the junkyard is quiet and the only sound is the wind moving through the wrecks, Cassie walks out to the fence where the rose bush still grows. It's massive now, tangled through the barbed wire, a riot of pink blossoms that shouldn't be able to survive in a place like this, but somehow do anyway. She stands there and thinks about Earl, about the flannel shirt he wrapped around her newborn daughter, about the letter she still keeps in the lockbox under the floor. She thinks about her mother, about the years they lost and the years they found, even about the photograph on the mantle and the way Donna's face had changed when she saw Rose for the first time. She thinks about what Earl wrote. The people who throw you away don't get to decide what you're worth. The people who pick you up do. And she thinks about what she's learned in the years since. That forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about choosing to put down the weight you've been carrying, not because the person who hurt you deserves it, but because you deserve to stop hurting. That healing isn't a destination. It's a direction. That you don't pay kindness back. You pay it forward. If you're watching this right now, and you feel like someone's thrown you away, like you're worthless, like you're garbage, like there's no point in climbing that fence because what's on the other side couldn't possibly be any better, I want you to hear what Earl Tatum said to a scared pregnant teenager in a junkyard 35 years ago. You're not charity. You're not a burden. You're not what they said you were. You're a person who's going to need some help and some time and some space to figure out who you really are. And if you're lucky, if you're very, very lucky, you'll find someone who sees past the rust. Someone who knows that the things other people throw away are often the most valuable things in the world. Cassie Whitmore was 17 years old and 11 weeks pregnant and standing on a curb with nothing but a garbage bag and $23. She's 52 years old now, and she owns 47 acres, and her daughter came back to work beside her. And she buried her mother with something that wasn't forgiveness, but might have been grace. The rosebush is still blooming. The junkyard is still standing. And somewhere in the back room of an Airstream trailer, there's a lockbox under the floor with a letter inside that says, "You don't pay it back. You pay it forward." She's still paying.